Chant and dance as much as possible in this human form of life.
Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chikshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Caitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadha Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadhi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Gurave Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tadbhaktaya Namo Namaha Anandalilamaya Vigrahaya Heimavadivya Chavisundaraya Tasmai Mahaprema Rasapradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste. Hare Krishna. So it's my supreme honor and good fortune to be amongst all the devotees in Philadelphia, if I'm right, Prabhu, or somewhere near Philadelphia.
Yeah, we are in Philadelphia and all over US. There are many people joining.
So
not from Philadelphia, all over. Mostly are from Philadelphia, but they're all over the US.
So before I begin, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to His Grace Ramcharan Prabhu for very kindly inviting me to this very beautiful Sangha. I don't know what I can add to the points that are already discussed in so many previous classes that Prabhu would have shared, but I would try my level best to add some value in the next 45 minutes or so. And also I would want to express my heartfelt gratitude to my most worshipable spiritual master Param Pujyapad Om Vishnupad Rupanuga Acharya Varya Srila Radha Govinda Das Goswami Maharaj and our most worshipable Srila Prabhupada A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, from whose works, books, commentaries, morning walks, I'll be presenting today's discussion. So if there is anything wrong that comes up, if I make any flaws, as Saragrahi Vaishnavas, I kindly beg all of you all to keep the flaws to the side and just accept the essence. And naturally, all the good points and all the credit that comes up in the discussion the complete credit goes to Srila Prabhupada and our predecessor Acharyas. And finally, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the assembled devotees on this call. If not for you all, I would not be here speaking Harikatha, speaking Gaurukatha. So I want to really express my heartfelt gratitude to all of the devotees present here, that because of you all, I am being inspired to speak something about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Please very kindly offer your very humble prayers and best wishes so that I can speak some favorable words in the glorification of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo. Hare Krishna. As His Grace Ram Charan Prabhu already mentioned, that next week we are celebrating the most auspicious occasion of the appearance day of Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, who is not different from Radha and Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as we know, appeared 500 years back in this plain, in the place of Bengal, West Bengal. And to be precise, in West Bengal, the place was Nadia. So in another 1 week's time, we will be celebrating his appearance. And 1 month, exactly 1 month before, that is 28th of February, around that time, we celebrated the appearance day of Avadhuta Shiromani Nityananda Ram. And before that, we celebrated Advaita Saptami, the appearance day of Advaita Acharya. So the month of February and March are marked especially with the appearance of not just Gauranga and Nityananda, but also their wonderful and glorious associates. So naturally, because we are going to celebrate Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance in another 1 week's time, our center of discussion is going to be from the Sri Chaitanya Caritamrita. Srila Kaviraj Goswami, who is the author of this most wonderful literature called as Chaitanya Caritamrita, he very beautifully describes, he says, Chaitanya Chandrera Leela Aghada Gambhir Praveshe Karite Nare Sparshira Hitir. Kaviraj Goswami says, Chaitanya Chandrera Leela Aghada Gambhir. The pastimes of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, they're Aghada and they're Gambhir, which means they're indescribable and they're unfathomable. Kaviraj Goswami, who is the author, very dear associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he himself, in his humility, is saying that pastimes of Gauranga, the attributes of Gauranga, the tattva of Gauranga, it is unfathomable. So we can understand that if the author himself is expressing his humility to not understand, to not comprehend fully the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then we are nowhere in the picture, at least speaking of myself. But it is only from the blessings of our predecessor acharyas that we can humbly attempt to speak and understand something about Gauranga. So Kaviraj Goswami says, Chaitanya Chandrera Leela Aghada Gambhir Pravesha Karite Nari. He says, what to speak about explaining, I can't even enter into this deep ocean. Pravesha Karite Nari. I can't even enter into this deep ocean. Sparshi Rahitira. I am simply touching the ocean. I'm simply scratching the surface. I'm simply taking a drop from this ocean, Kaviraj Goswami is saying. So the author himself is saying that I can't enter this ocean, but I'm just taking a drop. So from that, we can understand that Gauranga Mahaprabhu's pastimes are very difficult to understand. Dear devotees, it is for this reason that Srila Prabhupada said that Chaitanya Charitamrita is the postdoc study, it's the PhD study, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he comes down in the mood of Srimati Radharani. To understand Radharani in Vrindavan Dham is difficult. What to speak of Radharani and Krishna coming together? They fuse together in this dark age to spread love of Godhead. So understanding Radharani itself is difficult. What to speak of when Radharani and Krishna both come together? So that is why Prabhupada very perfectly has said that we start off with the Bhagavad Gita, then we go to Bhagavatam, and then finally we come to the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. But nonetheless, because this is the season of the appearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates, to just whet our appetite and to set the mood, to set our consciousness for the upcoming Gaurapurnima, we will just try to discuss something from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. As we all know, dear devotees, that Chaitanya Charitamrita is classified into three sections. We have the Adi Leela, which corresponds the first 24 years of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance. Whatever Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did in the first 24 years is documented in the Adi Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And where does Kaviraj Goswami get the details of the Adi Leela? Well, he gets it from Murari Gupta's diary. Murari Gupta is one of the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is not different from Hanumanji. Hanuman in the pastimes of Ramayana comes down as Murari Gupta to assist Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the first 24 years of Gauranga Mahaprabhu in the form of Nimai Pandit, that Nimai Pandit who would argue whether it is with Kolavaicha Sridhar or whether it is with Keshav Kashmiri and so on and so forth. All of those pastimes are very wonderfully and beautifully documented in the Adi Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the details come from Murari Gupta's diary. Then we proceed. From the age of 24 onwards, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, after taking sannyas, after taking Diksha from Ishwarapuri and then later taking sannyas, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu started traveling all around India. We know as to how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, after sannyas, he goes to Jagannath Puri and he wants to go to Vrindavan, but how Nityananda Prabhu tricks him and takes him to Shantipur, where Advaita Acharya is present. So all these travel details, how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes to South India in the pretext of searching his older brother, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes to South India to meet Rai Ramananda, who is none other than Vishaka Sakhi. So all these beautiful traveling details are described in the Madhya Leela of the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So from the age of 24 till the age of 30, the Madhya Leela describes Mahaprabhu's traveling to different places. And then finally, from the age of 30 till the age of 48, the last 18 years of Gauranga Mahaprabhu's earthly pastimes, Prakat Leela. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu lived in this world only for 48 years. So from the age of 30 till 48, Kaviraj Goswami describes all those pastimes that took place in that 18 years in the Antya Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So the first 24 years constitute the Adi Leela. The next 6 years is 24 to 30 forms the Madhya Leela, and 30 to 48 they form the Antya Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And the Madhya Leela and the Antya Leela, Kaviraj Goswami gets most of the details from Swarup Damodar Goswami's diary. So who is Swarup Damodar Goswami? He is none other than Lalita Sakhi. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes down to this world, when Radharani comes down in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lalita and Vishakha come down as Swarup Damodar Goswami and Rai Ramananda. So the last 24 years, that is Madhya Leela and Antya Leela, Kaviraj Goswami gets all those details from Swarup Damodar Goswami's beautiful work. So in our today's discussion, dear devotees, we will be trying to not dive deep, but we will just be trying to scratch the surface from the Antya Leela of the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. The Antya Leela has three themes that Kaviraj Goswami describes. The three themes that Antya Leela has, Kaviraj Goswami first starts off by describing Vaishnava care and compassion. He gives various examples of different associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the form of Haridas Thakur, in the form of Rai Ramananda, in the form of Swarup Damodar, in the form of Shivananda Sen, as to how in their life they demonstrated Vaishnava care and compassion. So this is the first theme of Antya Leela. The second theme of the Antya Leela of the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is how to prevent ourselves from roadblocks and pitfalls. We all in our journey of spirituality, in the journey of Krishna consciousness, everyone has different roadblocks, everyone has different pitfalls. And Kaviraj Goswami, who is completely self-realized, he understands. So he narrates different instances from the pastimes of Gauranga, things that we can learn and implement in our lives so that we don't commit those mistakes. So the first half of Chaitanya Charitamrita are the do's, which means the Vaishnava care and compassion. Then the second theme is the don'ts, the things that we should not be doing. And the examples that Kaviraj Goswami gives here are in the form of Chota Haridas, who's also called as Junior Haridas. Then we have Gopinath Patnaik, and then we have Ramchandra Puri, and so many others. So Kaviraj Goswami gives their life instances as to how we should not do the things that they did, because it did not please Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. On the flip side, Vaishnava care and compassion are the things that we should take inspiration from. So these are the first two themes, that is Vaishnava care and compassion, which we should be taking inspiration from. And second, the don'ts, the pitfalls or the blocks that we should refrain from. And finally, the third theme of the Antilila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita is the ecstatic manifestations of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in Jagannath Puri, what were the symptoms, what were the ecstatic manifestations that were happening in the heart of Gauranga Mahaprabhu? Because, dear devotees, we always hear that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is in the mood of Radharani. So then what are the things that he experienced in the mood of Radharani? Those things are described in the end part of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Kaviraj Goswami very beautifully describes that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would be so ecstatic. Any water body that Gauranga would see, he would be reminded of Yamuna. He would see the hill and he would be reminded of Govardhan. He would see the trees and he would be reminded of the Tamal and Kadamba trees. Whatever Gauranga would see would only remind him of Vrindavan Dham. So much so that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would smash his head against the wall in the mood of Radharani. His forehead would bleed, and no one was able to understand this mood except Ramananda Rai and Swarup Damodar, who is none other than Vishakha and Lalita. Because in the spiritual world, it is Lalita and Vishakha who are the most dear to Srimati Radharani. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes down, even in this world, it is Lalita and Vishakha in the form of Swarup Damodar and Rai Ramananda, who are there in the last phase, the last earthly pastimes of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, because only they could understand what is going on in the heart and in the mind of Gauranga. So this is the third theme of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the ecstatic symptoms. And it is in this section, the last section, where Kaviraj Goswami also gives the Sikshashtakam prayers, the 8 prayers that we chant every day in the morning. This comes in the last section of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, of the Antilila. So just to reiterate, Antilila of the Chaitanya Charitamrita has 3 sections. First is the Vaishnava care and compassion, the things that we should be doing in our lives, the things that we should take inspiration from. Then there are don'ts, the things that we should refrain from. And then finally, we have what are the ecstatic symptoms and manifestations that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu experienced in the mood of Srimati Radharani. So in this Antilila section, dear devotees, in the limited amount of time, there is no way we can describe all the sections of the Antilila, but we will just be taking one drop from the Vaishnava care and compassion, which forms the first theme, the first part of the Antilila of Chaitanya Charitamrita. We will be speaking about one personality very dear to the heart of Gauranga, as to how in his life he demonstrated extreme care and extreme compassion, and how we can take inspiration from his life. This personality, dear devotees, is none other than Shivananda Sen. Shivananda Sen is one of the very dear associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now, just before we dive into who Shivananda Sen is, Shivananda Sen had a very wonderful son by the name Kavi Karnapur. And Kavi Karnapur was so exalted and so glorious when he was very young, when he was less than 10. I would even say less than 5, because it is described that when Kavi Karnapur was very small, we see small children have this tendency of sucking their thumb. Naturally, every child would have had this habit of sucking the thumb. So Kavi Karnapur also, when he was small, he would have this habit. So once when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to meet Shivananda Sen, Kavi Karnapur, who was the son of Shivananda Sen, was so small that he was crawling on the ground. And in his sincerity, in his innocence, he ended up sucking the toe of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Instead of putting his hand, instead of putting his thumb inside his mouth, he put the toe of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu inside his mouth. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu understood this. Mahaprabhu was speaking to different associates, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu understood that Kavi Karnapur has just sucked his toe. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not say anything. He did not chastise because he was very small, Kavi Karnapur. So it is described that when Kavi Karnapur sucked the toe of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, from that moment onwards, he became so empowered that verses and compositions in the glorification of the Supreme Lord just started flowing from his mouth. Rivers and rivers of glorification to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Krishna started flowing just by sucking the toe of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. So his father was Shivananda Sen. So we can understand that if this son is so exalted, how glorious the father would have been. If Kavi Karnapur is so exalted and so glorious, how glorious his father Shivananda Sen is. Likewise, there is another instance from the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu of Mukunda and Raghunandan. Mukunda was the father and Raghunandan was the son. But Raghunandan was so glorious that when he would offer to the deities, when he would offer bhoga, now when we keep the plate, we say the mantras, we ring the bell, we close the curtains. And for us, Krishna doesn't come down the altar and eat from his own hands. Krishna eats from his eyes. But Raghunandan was so small that his father had told him the dog was all set. He was barking and he was wanting to come and sit in the boat. He also wanted to cross the river. Now the boatman, when he saw this, he was not very encouraging because naturally the dog would not give any Lakshmi. He would not offer any wealth to the boatman. So the boatman was not very willing to take the dog. But Kaviraj Goswami describes Shivananda Sen had so much compassion that he paid extra money for the dog. Now, dear devotees, this is extreme compassion. He paid extra money for the dog so that the dog can sit in the boat and come and meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So when the boatman received extra money, naturally he did not say anything because for him wealth was all that mattered. So when Shivananda Sen from his pocket gave extra money to the boatman agreed for the dog to come and sit in the boat. So the dog sat on the boat and in due course, they crossed over to the other side. Now, just to reiterate, dear devotees, the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu along with the dog are going to Jagannath Puri to meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this is the scene. So now they have crossed the river and they are spending their night in one small tent. They have not yet reached Jagannath Puri. So overnight, they're spending their time in one small tent. And at that time, Shivananda Sen, he tells his associate to take care of the dog. He says, take care of the dog. I am coming. I have some work to attend. I will attend that work, but make sure you take care of this dog. Make sure you feed this dog. Make sure whatever the dog wants, you should give it to that dog. So this is extreme compassion that Shivananda Sen is doing. He is not getting anything in return from the dog, but he, out of his compassion, is extending his abilities. Whatever he can do for the dog, he is willing to do. So he gave an instruction to his associate that make sure whatever the dog wants, the dog should get. So the associate, he agreed. And Shivananda Sen went to do whatever work that he wanted to do. And then late at night, when Shivananda Sen came back, he asked the associate about the whereabouts of the dog. Now, the associate had not taken this instruction very seriously. He had heard it from Shivananda Sen, but he just thought to himself that, well, at the end of the day, it is just a dog. So what big deal? Why should I take so much care of the dog? So he had not taken much care. So when Shivananda Sen came back, the dog was not to be seen anywhere. So Shivananda Sen did not give up. He sent 10 of his associates, 10 of his assistants, and said, go and search for the dog. And this was in the middle of the night when they all could have slept. Shivananda Sen is having so much compassion that he is sending 10 associates of his to go and search for the dog. So these 10 associates, they go and search for the dog. And at this time, Shivananda Sen is not eating anything. He is hungry. He has not had anything. But he is waiting when the dog can come back. When the dog can eat, only when the dog eats, will I eat, Shivananda Sen is thinking. So the 10 associates have gone for searching. They search different places. For hours together, they're searching. But they don't find the dog. And finally, they all come back and they tell Shivananda Sen, we tried our level best, but somehow we couldn't find the dog. So when Shivananda Sen got to know about this, that the dog had been lost, it was not to be found anywhere. That dog for whom Shivananda Sen paid extra money to the boatman, that dog was lost and not to be found anywhere. Shivananda Sen felt so bad that he decided to fast that night. Now, dear devotees, when was the last time we fasted for a dog? When was the last time we fasted for anyone apart from the Supreme Lord? We all fast for Gaurapurnima and Krishna Janmashtami, Nityananda Trayodashi and Ram Navami and so many other festivals. But all of these festivals are in connection with the Supreme Lord. When was the last time we fasted for someone near to us? And what to speak of fasting for an animal? Shivananda Sen, his heart was bleeding with compassion that because the dog was not found, he decided to fast that night. He said, I will not have anything. Till the time that dog is not found, I will not have anything. So in Mahaprabhu's pastimes, we find there are two kinds of associates. The first kind of associate is Advaita Acharya. Because we find once when Advaita Acharya was in Shantipur, Advaita Acharya was reading the Bhagavad Gita. And from one chapter to another chapter, Advaita Acharya was extolling how every chapter, every shloka, every word has bhakti in it. We have read the Bhagavad Gita so many times, but not every time can we derive the bhakti aspect from the Bhagavad Gita. It's only from chapter 7 to chapter 12 where we understand the bhakti essence that is present in it. But especially in the first chapter and the second chapter and the third chapter, in the sections of action and inaction, inaction, in those sections, it is very difficult for us to derive bhakti out of it. But Advaita Acharya was so exalted that in every verse, he could somehow find bhakti in it. But when Advaita Acharya came to the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, now this is so interesting. Advaita Acharya came to the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and at one point it is believed that Advaita Acharya could not understand as to how there is bhakti in that verse. As we know that 11th chapter is that section of the Gita when Krishna showed the universal form, the Virat Roop to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So Advaita Acharya tried his level best and he could not understand how there is bhakti in it. So Advaita Acharya decided to fast, dear devotees. Because he could not understand how there is bhakti, he decided to fast. For 3 days and 3 nights, Advaita Acharya did not eat anything. He did not sip a drop of water because he was not able to understand. He was not able to understand the bhakti import from that chapter. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Paramatma, he got to know Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left everything and ran to that place. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Oh Advaita, why are you fasting? Please have something. I will explain to you how this verse has bhakti in it, how this chapter has bhakti in it." So Advaita Acharya said, "No, my dear Lord, you first explain it to me, then I will break my fast." But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Bhagavan, and he's very skilled in his speaking ability. So somehow Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he convinced Advaita Acharya to first eat prasad. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made sure Advaita Acharya had something, and then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained it to him as to how the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita has bhakti, the essence in it. So now, dear devotees, we find there are two kinds of associates in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. First, Advaita Acharya, who is ready to fast for 3 days and 3 nights so that he can make spiritual progress, he can make spiritual advancement. So first kind of associate is they are ready to go the extra mile. They have so much fire and so much steam and so much intensity that they're fasting for 3 days and 3 nights so that they can go the extra mile. And the second associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Shivananda Sen, who is fasting for others, for their benefit, they're fasting. So the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are teaching, we not just do good for ourselves, but we also do para upakar. We also think about others. Not just that we are selfish and just think of our benefit, but we also think we are also well-wishers of all living entities, not just the humans. So Shivananda Sen is exemplifying this point of Vaishnava care and compassion, not just in the humans, but even to the animal species. So that night, Shivananda Sen did not have anything. And even in the morning when he got up, Shivananda Sen, his mind was thinking, where is the dog? Where is the dog? That dog for whom I paid extra money so that he can meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The point was not that Shivananda Sen was attached to the dog. We have to be very careful here. Shivananda Sen was not attached to the dog like most people in this world are. We see, especially when I remember when I was in New Jersey, and I would go to the Bhakti Center, which is in New York. I would, so many times in the downtown of Manhattan, I would find so many people having a belt around their waist, and there would be 3 and 4 dogs that they would tie around their waist. But in that case, they are attached to the dog. But in Shivananda Sen's case, Shivananda Sen was not attached to the dog. He was thinking of the welfare of the dog. So that if he finds the dog can meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can uplift that dog. So that was what was going on in the heart of Shivananda Sen. So the sun rose in the morning and the dog was not to be found, and Shivananda Sen was feeling very sad in his heart. But they all decided to proceed towards Jagannath Puri. And when they reached Jagannath Puri, all the associates, they took darshan of Jagannath Dev. They took darshan of Baladev and Subhadra and Sudarshan Ju. And finally, after freshening up, they came to meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was present in Jagannath Puri. Now, interestingly, when Shivananda Sen and all the associates came to meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri, Shivananda Sen was completely amazed. He was completely surprised, because that dog which he was searching throughout, that dog for whom he had sent 10 associates to find, that dog was sitting near the lap of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The dog was so eager that Shivananda Sen and his associates, they stopped at night, but the dog just marched to meet Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the next day when they all came to Puri, this dog was sitting near Gauranga Mahaprabhu. And Gauranga Mahaprabhu was very sweetly, he was feeding coconut pulp to the dog. Mahaprabhu was feeding coconut pulp to the dog and saying, chant the names of Krishna, chant the names of Ram, Chant the names of Govinda. Chant the names of Madhava. As Bilva Mangala Thakur very beautifully says, Govinda Damo Dharmadhaveti, Govinda Damo Dharmadhaveti, Govinda Damo Dharmadhaveti, Govinda Damo Dharmadhaveti. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was telling, chant the names of Govinda, chant the names of Madhava. Govinda, Damodara, Madhava iti. Please chant these names. He was telling the dog. And at that time, Shivananda Sen, who saw the dog sitting close to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he gave full obeisances. He gave full dandavats to the dog. Now, dear devotees, this is the height of humility. This is the height of compassion and height of care that Shivananda Sen demonstrated. He gave complete dandavat, complete obeisances to the dog. Why? Because he wanted to counteract his offense. He was feeling so bad to himself that it is because of him that the dog was lost all night. Shivananda Sen gave complete dandavats to the dog, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was seeing this, and Mahaprabhu was very happy that Shivananda Sen had this desire to give Krishna consciousness to everyone, not just the human beings. And we find the same theme, dear devotees. Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita says the same point. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastine Shuni Chaiva Swapakecha Pandita Samadarshana. Krishna in the Gita, he says, Pandita Samadarshana. A Pandit, a real Pandit, is anyone who sees everyone equally. Samadarshina, he sees everyone equally. Not just people of this world, not just the humans, not just male, female, a young child or an adult, irrespective of caste, creed, race, not just the humans, but even the animals. Krishna says a Pandit is someone who sees everyone equally. And Shivananda Sen was actually demonstrating this point. We can imagine, dear devotees, that how many of us would go and give a dandavat to a dog? It is beyond imaginations. But Kaviraj Goswami describes the Vaishnava care and compassion of Shivananda Sen, that he gave a complete dandavat to the dog. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at that time was requesting the dog, chant the name of Govinda, chant the name of Damodar, chant the name of Madhava. And because the dog was in the association of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the dog was surcharged with the intensity that was flowing from the heart of Gauranga. The waves of Krishna Prem that is present in the heart of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu entered the heart of the dog, and the dog started jumping and dancing and started loudly chanting Govinda Damodara Madhaveti, Govinda Damodara Madhaveti. The dog started jumping and started chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. So much so that very soon, in front of all the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that dog, because of his sincerity and intensity, he immediately got a 4-handed Vishnu form and he went back home, back to Godhead. That dog who was in the dog body got a 4-handed Vishnu form and he went back home, back to Godhead. So the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when they saw this, they were completely stunned. What to speak of humans? Even the dogs were going back home, back to Godhead. We find the same thing in the Jarikanda forest, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu induced the tigers, the deers, the peacocks, the parrots. They all were chanting the names of Krishna. And we find the same thing in the Vaishnava bhajans. We find our Vaishnava acharyas. They very beautifully, they say, Jive daya Krishna naam sarva dharma sar, Nadiya godrume nityananda mahajan. Jive daya Krishna naam sarva dharma sar. Jiva daya, compassion for other living entities, and Krishna Nam, the names of the Supreme Lord. Sarva Dharma Sar. It is the essence of all the teachings. It is the essence of all religion. And we find here that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was showing his compassion to the dog and making the dog chant the holy name. So there was Jivadaya and there was chanting of the holy name. And the dog very soon got a four-handed form and went to Vaikuntha planets. So Kaviraj Goswami there is making the point that if dogs can chant the holy name and can go back home, back to Godhead, what to speak of devotees who are practicing every single day with sincerity? What to speak of their destination? If dogs just by chanting once can go back home, back to Godhead, what supreme destination is awaiting for all the devotees who are chanting and dancing and hearing Krishna Katha? So we should be rest assured that this is the perfect path. This is the right path for complete self-realization that Srila Prabhupada and the predecessor Acharyas have given us. This is why we also find Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his beautiful Sharanagati series. He very beautifully, he writes, Tumi to Thakur tumar kukur bhuliya jana ho more sarvasva tomar charane sampeya purichi tumara ghare Tumi to Thakur tumar kukur Boliya jana ho more. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, my dear Lord, Sarvasva Tumar, I give everything to you. I do not hold back anything, my dear Lord. I am giving everything to you. Tumi to Thakur, you are the Supreme Lord. And Tumar Kukur. Kukur means a dog. Bhaktivinoda Thakur saying, my dear Lord, you are the master. I am your dog. This dog is selling himself at your lotus feet. Lifetime after lifetime, make sure that even if I become a dog, I am there amidst Vaishnava Sangha. I am amidst Vaishnava association. Because where there are devotees, even if someone is there in dog body, they will for sure get uplifted. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is making this point. Tumi to Thakur tumar kukur, bhuliya jana ho more. Very wonderful song, the Sharanagati series. So Prabhupada and Kaviraj Goswami, they from this pastime, they give a few lessons that we can learn. They say that first, Shivananda Sen's loving compassion for the dog turned out to be a boon for that dog. The dog did not do anything on its own, but Shivananda Sen, because out of his compassion, he brought the dog, he paid extra money for the dog. The dog, it's as if the dog had a spiritual boon. The second point, because of Shivananda Sen's compassion, the dog could meet Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made the dog chant the holy name. So devotees are those who are not just compassionate, but they take that living entity and place that living entity in the lotus feet of their superiors, in the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, like Shivananda Sen did. He took the dog and he placed the dog in the lotus feet of Gauranga Mahaprabhu. And finally, our predecessor Acharyas, they describe, Srila Prabhupada describes this pastime, also describes as to what are the benefits of being favorite to a Vaishnava. If we can somehow in our life become favorite to one Vaishnava, one pure Vaishnava, just like the dog became favorite to Shivananda Sen. If we can somehow chalk out a way where we can become favorite to a particular Vaishnava, then that just opens the door of complete self-realization. Because without Sadhu Kripa, without Vaishnava mercy, we do not progress any far ahead in bhakti. So Srila Prabhupada and Kaviraj Goswami describe that these are the few lessons that we can learn from this beautiful pastime of Shivananda Sen's connection with the dog. We find Bhakti Tirtha Swami Maharaj, one of the very celebrated disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj at that time was so dynamic in his preaching. He did not fear anyone. He would go to places where people would think twice whether we should go there and preach, because the consequences could have been very dangerous. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, during those days, he decided to preach in East Europe. Now, dear devotees, East Europe at that time was very dangerous, for the fact that if you're caught preaching, if you're caught selling books, then you're sent to Siberia. And it's like a life imprisonment. You're sent to Siberia. And Siberia is not a place like Shimla or Manali, or it's not a holiday destination where you can live comfortably. Siberia is a place where it's extremely cold. So if you're caught spreading Krishna consciousness or any of those cult, then you're immediately put behind bars, like life imprisonment. But Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was so fired up and so dynamic that he loaded a truck of 5,000 Bhagavad Gitas. Dear devotees, this is so beautiful. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, he was so fired up to spread Krishna consciousness that he took a truck and loaded that truck with 5,000 Bhagavad Gitas. And now he was very smart, because he knew that before entering into the East Europe, there is going to be a checkpoint. There are going to be security guards who have fully loaded guns. So naturally, if they catch Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, there is no way he's going to take the books across the border. So Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was very intelligent. He took a dog with him. So basically, throughout our discussion, we are trying to get dog into our picture, whether it is Shivananda Sen or whether it is Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj got a dog with him in the truck, and he was driving. And when he reached the checkpoint, the guards, they stopped and they said, well, you can't take the dog to our country. So Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj said, no, this dog is very attached to me. He's my pet dog. I have to take him. So the guard said, there is no way you're going to take the dog. We are not going to allow you to take the dog. So Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj said, no, this dog is very attached. He cannot live without me. If I don't provide for him, he will die. He's very dear to me. So please allow me to take the dog. And the guards would refuse. And for the next 30 minutes, the discussion simply centered around the dog, whether the dog can be taken or not taken. And finally, the guard who was there, he pleaded to Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. He said, I beg you, please don't take the dog, because if you take the dog, my job is at stake. They will throw me out of my job. I beg you, please don't take this dog. I request you. So the guard had to become humble in front of Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. So then Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj said, okay, if you're saying so, I will not take the dog, but make sure you release the dog in the right place. So this guard said, yes, I will do that. So the guard took the dog and he went inside the forest to release the dog in the woods. And he opened the gates and the truck stormed inside East Europe. 5,000 Bhagavad Gitas entered into the East Europe by the mercy of the dog, because for 30 minutes, this discussion centered around the dog, so much so that the guard forgot that Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was carrying Bhagavad Gita in his truck. He was so engrossed in speaking about the dog that the guard completely forgot everything. So by the mercy of the dog, 5,000 Gitas entered East Europe, and Krishna consciousness spread in those areas of Siberia and East Europe. So the point I'm trying to make here, dear devotees, is we are not inimical to other living entities. Krishna Bhakta ei bada chatur. Krishna Bhakta is very smart. He is very intelligent. He will extend his compassion to the dog in the form of Shivananda Sen. At the same time, for preaching purpose, he will know how to maneuver and how to use the dog so that Krishna consciousness can be spread far and wide. And Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was the best example. By the mercy of one dog, 5,000 Gitas entered into the East Bloc, and complete Krishna consciousness was spread in those areas single-handedly by Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, who was so intelligent to trick the guard by bringing the dog. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj did not have a dog of his own, but that was a master plan that he had brought so that the guard gets diverted, his attention gets diverted, and the books can go inside. So in this way, devotees means we have equal love for everyone. We not just chant the holy name, but we also have equal love for the human beings and for the animals. And we make sure that we give the best to them by bringing them close to the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We also finally, we find this point that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was asking the dog to chant the holy names. This holy name, dear devotees, is the essence of all the teachings. It is the fundamental essence of all the teachings, absolutely. There is a very beautiful instance of a personality by the name Sadhana Kasai. Now we know in Hindi, Kasai means a butcher. So his name was Sadhana, and because he was a butcher by profession, he was called as Sadhana Kasai. But he would not kill the animals. The animals that was already killed, he would just cut the meat. So the animals were killed by someone else, and he would just cut the meat and he would give it out to others. But even though that constitutes in the category of butcher, he was called as Sadhana Kasai. But he had a very interesting daily routine. Whenever he would cut, now we have weighing scales in India. When especially we go to buy fruits, we go to buy vegetables, there are weighing scales, whether it's 100 grams, 200 grams, 500 grams, they have weighing scales. So Sadhana Kasai also, when he would weigh the meat, he had something to weigh the meat, whether it is 1 kg or 2 kg. But interestingly, what he had was not a stone, but he had a Shaligram Shila. He didn't know that it was a Shaligram Shila. He was using a Shaligram Shila to weigh the meat that he was selling to others. And it is so interesting that when the customer wanted 1 kg of meat, the Shaligram would weigh 1 kg. When the customer would want 2 kgs of meat, the Shaligram would end up weighing 2 kgs of meat. And Sadhana Kasai was completely perplexed as to how this so-called stone was changing its weight. But nonetheless, he was very happy because his business was going on. So one day, when he was selling this meat, one sadhu, one saint, one devotee walked by. And the moment the devotee saw this, his heart was bleeding. He chastised Sadhana Kasai and said, "What are you doing? Do you even understand that this so-called stone that you're using for weighing is not a stone, but it is Shaligram Shila? Do you even have basic intelligence that this is Shaligram Shila? Shaligram Shila is so glorious. He is not different from the Supreme Lord Krishna. And you are using him for weighing meat?" So when Sadhana Kasai got to hear this, he said, "Oh Sadhu, please forgive me. I do not know. I thought it is a basic stone. That's why I was using it." Sadhu became very angry. He said, "Give the stone to me. He's a Shaligram Shila. I will take the Shaligram Shila with me and I will worship him." So Sadhana Kasai said, the way, whatever you think is right, you can do it. So he voluntarily gave the Shaligram Shila that he had. So the sadhu went home and he began to pray to the Lord that, "My dear Lord, he is a madman. He doesn't know. He was using you for weighing meat. But my dear Lord, I know you are a Shaligram Shila. I beg at your feet. Please forgive me and please forgive him also." And this sadhu, he began to do Panchamrit Abhishek. He was using honey, yogurt, ghee, water. He was using everything for worshipping the Shaligram Shilas. That night when he went to sleep, the Shaligram Shila came in the dream of the sadhu. And he said, "What have you done? Why did you take me from Sadhana Kasai. I was very happy with him. So the sadhu said, my dear Lord, he was using you for weighing meat and you're saying you're happy with him. I am doing Panchamrit Abhishek here. I thought you're happy with me. The Lord said, you may be doing Panchamrit Abhishek, but his tongue is vibrating the holy name. Even when he's cutting the meat, he's chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. He is constantly doing Harinam Sankirtan. His tongue is constantly vibrating. But your tongue is not vibrating. You're simply doing Abhishek, but your tongue is not vibrating. So I prefer to be with him. I prefer to be with someone whose tongue is vibrating the holy name. So the sadhu asked the Supreme Lord. This was all in the dream, by the way. So the sadhu asked the Supreme Lord that, my dear Lord, which is that place where you actually reside? I thought you were in that place where people worship you, but seems like you are more willing to be with Sadhana Kasai than to be with me. At that time, the Supreme Lord, he says, Naham vasami vaikunte yoginam hridayeshu va yatra gayanti madbhakta tatra tishtami Narada. Krishna actually told this to Narada Muni. Oh Narada, Naham vasami vaikunte. I don't reside in Vaikunta. Yoginam hridayeshu va. I don't even reside in the heart of the yogis. Then where does Krishna reside? He doesn't reside in Vaikunta. He doesn't reside even in the heart of the yogis. Yatra gayanti mad bhakta tatra tishtami Narada. Oh Narada, wherever my devotees are chanting and dancing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, that is where I am present. Clear indication in the Bhagavatam. This comes from the 9th canto, chapter 4 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yatra gayanti mad bhakta tatra tishtami Narada. Wherever my devotees are chanting, I am present there. So the Supreme Lord as Shaligram, he told this sadhu that take me back to Sadhana Kasai. Even though he is in meat profession, he is chanting the holy name. So the sadhu again went and he fell at the feet of Sadhana Kasai and gave the Shaligram back. And he said, that seems like you're an exalted devotee. I'm sorry, I did not understand your glories. But it's very interesting here, dear devotees. Sadhana Kasai, even though he was a butcher, he was not killing animals, but the animals were already killed and they were being brought to him and he was simply cutting the meat. But how did he come into this profession? He came into this profession through his family lineage. It came from his generations, from his father to his forefathers and so on and so forth. So he inherited that profession, even though he did not like it. It is clearly described. He did not like the profession, but just for money, he was maintaining his life. But now there is a very interesting history of his previous life. Now we backtrack to Sadhana Kasai's previous life. How did he end up being a butcher? It is believed that Sadhana Kasai in his previous life was a very sincere devotee of the Lord who was chanting and dancing. And he was worshipping the same Shaligram Shila that in his next life he was using for weighing the meat. Because he was so attached to the Shaligram, in the next life also that same Shaligram somehow or the other, by the will of Supreme Lord, he again came back to Sadhana Kasai. But in his previous life, he was a very good devotee, but he did a mistake. He did one aparad. It so happened that once a cow was running in the fear of a butcher, and the cow ran and the butcher came to Sadhana Kasai, who was there in his previous life. The butcher came to him and asked, did you see where the cow went? Now, ideally, our scriptures, they say that there are instances where even if you say a lie, it is justified. For example, if it is in connection to protecting an animal's life, even if you say a lie, that is fine. Or a lie when it is said for a marriage to take place, that is fine. Or when a lie is said is to protect someone's life, that is also completely fine. So there are instances in scriptures where even if someone lies, it is justified because it is done for the welfare of someone. So ideally, in this case, Sadhana Kasai, who in his previous life should have not given the actual route to this butcher, but he ended up giving the direction. He did not open his mouth, but he ended up giving direction because he was truthful, but he was truthful in the wrong place. So he gave the direction to the butcher, and the butcher went and he killed the cow. So because of this aparad that he did, he ended up becoming a butcher in his next life. But because he was a devotee, the same abilities that he had, the same devotion that he had of constantly chanting and dancing, he inherited that even in his next life as Sadhana Kasai. So in this way, even though he was a butcher, his tongue was constantly chanting the holy name, and the Lord at Shaligram wanted to live with him more than that sadhu. Why? Because his tongue was chanting the holy name constantly, while the sadhu was simply doing Panchamrita Abhishek. So this is a very important point, dear devotees. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's fundamental teaching is to constantly chant the holy name. Kirtaniya Sadahari. Nirantara naam lau kara tulsi seva achirata pabe tumi Shri Krishnera charan. Nirantara naam lau. The tongue should always be vibrating the holy name. Nirantara naam lau kara tulsi seva. Worship Tulsi Devi and constantly chant the holy name. Achirata pabe tumi Shri Krishnera charan. Very soon we will get the lotus feet of Shri Krishna. So doing Panchamrit Abhishek is very good, but if it is not backed up with constant chanting of the holy name, then Krishna is showing that he prefers to live with a butcher like Sadhana Kasai than with someone else who is not chanting the holy name. This is the fundamental teaching of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jive Doya Krishna Nam Sarva Dharma Sar. Compassion to other living entities and constant chanting. The tongue should constantly be vibrating the holy name. So in the case of Shivananda Sain, which forms the first section of the Antilila, we find this theme of extreme care and compassion that he had for the dog, that helped the dog go to Vaikuntha planets. And second point we find is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu induced the dog, encouraged the dog to chant the holy name. So these are two lessons that we can learn from this section of the dear associate of Shivananda Sain, that is compassion, Vaishnava care and compassion for other living entities, and constant chanting of the holy name. Having said this, I stop here. If there were any flaws in the discussion, I humbly beg to all the devotees to keep the flaws to the side and just take the essence. And any point, if there are any points that touched our heart or inspired us on this path of bhakti, the complete credit goes to our predecessor acharyas from Srila Prabhupada and all his superiors. So all the beautiful teaching is coming from that dhara. So anything that has inspired us, it is coming from our Gurujan's teaching. Having said this, I stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Shri Nityananda Prabhu ki jai. Upcoming Gaurapurnima festival ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.